really excited to have my first debut and launched lecture that I have been providing and lecturing on this past week with my students. And I thought it would be a really fitting and fun lecture to dive right into with you all as viewers and listeners and subscribers. So this topic, it's called Mafia, from Capone to the Teflon Don with love. And I want to go ahead and just kind of give you a backstory, which is a nice segue into talking about modern gangs. But I thought that this is a great way and a fitting way to start this channel, looking at original gangsters and some of the classic misdeeds of them. So let's jump right in. So what does this acronym Mafia stand for? Well, it's one that I came up with, and it's called Masters at Finding Incredible Assassins. Now, I want you to think about who are some of the most notable and noteworthy assassins in modern history. Maybe names like John Wilkes Booth comes to mind, Lee Harvey Oswald, maybe James Earl Ray. There's other assassins that maybe didn't complete their mission, but they get same level of notoriety, such as John Hinckley Jr. Well, when we're talking about, and if I'm going to talk about the mafia and the mob, and I'm going to talk about gangsters from a classic standpoint, it's so important. It's so very important to talk about how these individuals are masters, and they're masters at finding incredible assassins, because what I'm going to show you in this first part, and then we'll come back and look at the second part in another video, they're so crafty and so skilled at finding people to do their dirty work, yet it is ultimately their responsibility, and they take great ownership in being the ones who called out or called to pass the murder. So recognize there's a distinction between assassin and the commonly used henchmen of the mafia known as hitmen. Now, an assassin is a political person who takes out an important figure, or a person rather, who takes out an important figure because of political or religious reasons. There is a difference in the political ideology of the assassin. Maybe they don't agree with the person's religious views, but they will take them out for that purpose. Now, the origin of the word is that it was established in the early 16th century, and it comes from the French word assassin, which also translates into murderer in English. Now, a hitman, on the other hand, this is a person who is paid to take out someone, especially for a criminal organization. Now, hitmen are also known as contract killers, and we know contract killing is simply defined as a form of murder in which one party hires another party to take out a targeted person or a group of people, regardless of the age, gender, or ethnicity. That's what contract killing is. Typically, contract killing involves an illegal agreement, which includes some form of compensation, most notably money. You're not going to go ahead and say, okay, I want you to take out this person, or we'll use the terminology of the mob and the mafia, whack this person, and we'll talk about that in the next video and next class. We're not going to go ahead and say, well, I need you to whack this person, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give you eggs. And listen, I have to make a joke because right now eggs are very, very expensive. No. And you're not going to do it for fuel. You're going to take them out because you need money. You're going to do it most notably for money. So remember what I talked about, and this was really for my students though, but I want to treat you all as my students because I'm your professor. Remember what hitmen used by the Sinaloa cartel are called. These hitmen are known as sicarios. And so sicarios are nothing more than hired, killers And the word originates from a Latin word meaning sicarius, which means assassin or murderer. So what's fascinating here, class, is that you have um, the word assassin is a French word which translates to murderer in English, but a sicario is a Latin word, or sicarius is a Latin word which translates to assassin or murderer. So the context is universal regardless of the name or the country of origin, so to speak. But sicarios are very brutal, and they exhibit a level of violence at the behest and order of the cartel, and it's one of the reasons why the Sinaloa cartel is very, very feared and revered. I had a lecture several weeks ago talking about the Sinaloa cartel, and with this being a class called gangs, it is very important to pause and recognize that any gang has a criminal element. That's one of the reasons why the gang continues to operate in the manner that they do. If you take away the criminal element, you don't have a gang. You have a group of people. You might have a clique. You might have a, you know, an association, so to speak. You may have a clan, but you don't have a gang. Once you have the criminal element, that's where you have a gang. And so if the cartel wants stone cold folks, stone cold killers, they want people who are going to do their bidding. They typically are going to recruit them at young ages and even as teenagers because they want to train them to be the ruthless people that they need, the ruthless sicarios that they need. Let's talk about Alphonse Gabriel Capone. So Alphonse Gabriel Capone was nicknamed Scarface, and this is him as a little boy or as a young man. And he is without a doubt the most influential and notorious gangsters of our generation, of a lifetime. That was Al Capone. He was born in 1899 to Italian immigrants in New York City, and he joined the Five Points gang as a teenager, where he also became a bouncer in organized crime brothels. Now, yeah, can do it. All right. So, it's so great that I'm in my office. So this right here that I'm drawing, right? You see this? Okay, and then we go up, and we go up, and they converge. This is a rhombus. This also looks like a diamond, right? Well, one of the things I teach and lecture on, and I want to convey this to you all as students, as the world, is something called, that I call the four pillars. And these four pillars are the four pillars of notable gang activity. When we look at the South, we have Miami. That's where you're going to have the heaviest concentration of gang activity in the South, Miami. Some will say Atlanta, it's Miami. When you look at the West, or the West Coast, West Side, we're going to have LA. When you look at the Midwest, we have Chicago, okay? And lastly, when we look at the North, or in this case, the Northeast, we have New York City. These are the four pillars, class, of notable gang activity. Well, Al Capone was born in one of those pillars in New York City, where he grew up. And New York City was a haven for immigrants who came from Italy and came from other countries. They went to Ellis Island. I mean, I love history, so I love talking about this. Well, he started off joining a Five Points gang at essentially one of the birthplaces of gang activity in this entire country, New York City, which is one of the pillars. And then he goes to another pillar in the Midwest in Chicago. So in 1920, he goes to Chicago. He becomes a bodyguard for a man by the name of Johnny Torrio. And Johnny Torrio was the head of a crime syndicate that illegally supplied alcohol. I do want to pause and let you have a snapshot of what's been going on in the country during this period of time. So as you see, in the 1920s, the United States was going through something called Prohibition. And all prohibition was, class, was this period of time where you couldn't sell alcohol, you couldn't buy alcohol, you couldn't transport alcohol, you couldn't produce alcohol. Alcohol was illegal. Imagine in 2025, there's no alcohol being sold at sports bars right now. There's no alcohol being sold at football stadiums. There's no alcohol being sold at baseball stadiums and other establishments. Like, imagine that. Well, that's what you had in the 1920s. And so the 18th Amendment outlawed alcohol, and the Volstead Act actually enforced the ban. It was named after Representative Andrew Volstead. What happened, class? Well, you started having gangsters and you started having mobsters seeing a lucrative business because they said we can step in, and they created something called bootlegging. And so all bootlegging was this illegal manufacturing, transportation, distribution, or sale of alcoholic beverages during the Prohibition era. Look at how much money gangsters reportedly made. They made nearly 3.6 billion, not million, billion in bootleg liquor sales in 1 year. Listen, folks love to drink. They love their alcohol. They do. And for gangsters to make that much money, it was a clear indicator that this was a business that, in some regards, probably shouldn't have shut down. Because what was going on in the country besides Prohibition? The Great Depression. We have never seen a period like that in our country since 1920, when we were in the Great Depression. Yes, we've had recessions. We have a volatile stock market. The economy has tanked several times, but never to the levels of the Great Depression. And so I asked the question in class, and it begs to differ. Why would the government, or why wouldn't, rather, the government get in on the action to jumpstart the economy? Well, the answer is simple. They said enough is enough. We can't sit back and watch $3.6 billion in liquor sales during a period of time now when you had people who were not making it, is the best term I could use safely, because they lost everything. So the 21st Amendment officially repealed the ban and ended prohibition in 1933. So think about it. This country was dry from 1920 to 1933. Now, when we say dry, we mean it was legally dry. We know it was very much illegally running. But why was prohibition repealed? Well, first of all, people didn't like the fact that there was a ban in the first place. They said, why are we even doing this in the first place? And a woman by the name of Carrie Nation, she led the fight against getting alcohol banned. She talked about how alcohol was a demon and it was breaking up homes and it was destroying families. And in an era in the 1920s where the family unit was so close, it wasn't what it is today. Families were so close. The fact that she said it, people believed it. Of course, there was economic hardships facing millions of Americans during the Great Depression. As I said a moment ago, people lost everything gone. We had a rise in organized crime, and because gangsters were engaged in the sale of illegal alcohol and the illegal alcohol trade, they were basically distilling alcohol in their house, they were distilling alcohol in abandoned warehouses, and they were selling it, again, bootlegging, and creating moonshine, so to speak, if you've ever heard of the term moonshine. What they ended up doing was the government looked and said, we have to get a handle on organized crime because the gangs or the mafia, the mobsters, are controlling the sale and distribution of alcohol. And so what that meant was that the government said, you know what, we want our cut, because that's the government for you. They said that we want to tax revenue from alcohol sales, and people said, okay, we don't have a problem with you all taxing revenue from alcohol sales. So there's an old saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Look at this picture. Look at people saying farewell to the 18th Amendment. Look at the cup right. Look at the cup right here. Ooh, that's a big cup. You know, people are excited. And one of the things that I really love about this photo, and I mentioned this to my class the other day, is the fact that I love that you see women in this picture because think about the era that existed. Women hadn't even really gone through the suffrage movement where they were working to get equality and be seen as equals. And if they were going through the suffrage movement, it was still kind of in its early stages. And yet you see this picture right here, which I think is, again, very telling and a very stark picture of these women with what may be a martini or some other cocktail drink. So prohibition ending was big, big, big business. So going back to Al Capone, since he was the bodyguard of Johnny Torrio, there was a significant benefit in having that job because it gave him additional business knowledge of the gang. He learned rather some unique perspectives when it comes to the gang, the inner workings and dealings and business ventures of the gang. And so after Torrio was nearly killed by Northside gang hitmen, he retires and actually hands over the reins of the leadership of the gang to Capone. So he names Al Capone the new boss. He says, "You're going to be the boss." And he retires and moves to Italy. Now, I would argue, and I could be just playing conspiracy theory. Maybe you know, maybe someone will put it in the comments or put it in the chat or something. But should we be wondering where Al Capone was in all this? Should we be wondering why Al Capone was Johnny Torrio's bodyguard and there was no real report and mention of Al Capone getting shot? Again, could be wrong. Or could it have been a hit? Could it have been an inside job? We don't know. So what happened? Now that Al Capone is the boss, now that he's the man, the one you see dressed right here, dressed clean, dressed sharply, now, because he's now in charge, what happened was he exhibited a great level of power and influence over the Chicago outfit. And they are often known as the Chicago Mafia or the Chicago Mob, but he wielded a great deal of power and influence. And this gang, the Chicago outfit, is a part of a larger Italian-American mafia that I'll talk about in the next class. You'll get that coming up very, very soon. But believe it or not, the Chicago outfit is still in existence today. So I typically have not talked about gang hierarchy in the context of my class with the college university. What they have shared, or what I'm sharing rather with the students, is that the person at the very top is the boss. When I talk about this in the context of modern gangs, particularly criminal and urban and organized street gangs, they may be called something else. But for this sake, looking at the mob or the mafia, they're called the boss. The boss is nothing more than the Don. He's the godfather. He's even viewed as a kingpin, so to speak, but he's the boss. The consigliere is the right hand to the boss. The consigliere is the one who is kind of the mediator. And like I shared in class, like I said in class again, the consigliere has as much influence and as much power as the boss. They just don't call the shots. But if the consigliere speaks, you better believe the people under the boss listen. So with that, you have your underboss. Your underboss would be kind of like in law enforcement. They would be like your major, someone that has a great deal of power, runs interference on some things before they actually get to the boss. You also have your capo regime. The capo regime, or the capo, is nothing more than a captain. They may have a different region that they're responsible for, and they'll have soldiers and associates that report to them. So this hierarchy is so important, class, and it's so powerful to see because what it shows is that this criminal organization is just that. They're very, very organized and very disciplined. And of course, we see right here Scarface himself, Al Capone. He was the boss. He was at the very top. Well, the Chicago outfit, which is so amazing, the Chicago outfit is still in existence even to this day. Nearly 100 years later, and they're still around. The man pictured here to the right This individual right here was John DeFranco, aka No Nose. He ends up getting a piece of his nose cut off when he was running from the police after he burglarized a clothing store, so they called him No Nose. And the man to the left that you see right here, this man is a bit of a mystery. This is Salvatore De Laurentiis. He's aka Solly D. There's not a whole lot known about him. The mafia has kind of kept him, or he's kept himself really out of the public eye when it comes to the Chicago outfit. But he is currently the boss. He assumed the position of boss after No Nose passed away due to an illness in 2018. So it's very interesting to see and hear, folks, that literally there are men that are operating the Chicago outfit just like Al Capone did nearly 100 years ago. So Capone uses his savvy business acumen to prey on vulnerable citizens during the Prohibition in the Great Depression. So he felt like, hey, if you need to buy liquor, if you need goods, if you need services, we can provide those. You're going to pay a hefty fine, fee, or tax, but we can provide those. We can help you. And in doing so, he managed very profitable relationships with the mayor, Mayor William Hale Thompson, and even the Chicago Police Department. They were on his payroll. He literally was a kingpin. He was a modern day kingpin. Some of you might get that reference as well. While he did seem untouchable, and this was a direct reference to this movie in the late 1980s, The Untouchables. Yes, he did feel untouchable. What ultimately was his downfall was this event that occurred on the Day of Love, which is why I call this Mafia from Al Capone to the Teflon Don with love. And that was the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, February 14th. So on this particular St. Valentine's Day, February 14th, back in the 1920s, late 1920s, two Chicago typewriters, or Tommy guns, Thompson machine guns, they were used to kill 7 members of the North Side Gang. And basically, the Chicago outfit had a long-running feud with the North Side Gang, and the North Side Gang was led by George Bugs Moran, and then, of course, Al Capone. He ran the Chicago outfit. Well, unfortunately, one way to kill your inner relationship with the mayor and the police are to utilize the police and to bring an unwanted attention or image to that particular town or community. So Capone becomes public enemy number one because the massacre damaged the reputation of Chicago. And I believe it's called like the Chicago World Fair or the Chicago Trade Show, but this is an event where literally approximately thousands and thousands of vendors come from all over the world to Chicago to display some of the greatest and newest advances in food technology, new foods, other forms of technology. It is very, very noteworthy. Well, in a place like Chicago, you don't want that negative publicity with, hearing that 7 men were gunned down and that a potential gangster could be involved with it. So having said that, he becomes public enemy number one, not just because of the death, but because the shooters were dressed like police officers and they weren't, which showed how much influence and pull Al Capone had, that he had police in his pocket. So the federal government came after Capone with mighty fury and with every possible tool they had. And this is so mind-blowing. They didn't get him on murder charges. They didn't get him on conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, none of those. They only got him on 22 counts of tax evasion. And so in 1931, he was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. He ended up going to the Atlanta U.S. Penitentiary for a little bit. And then, of course, he went to Alcatraz. Now, a prison that he went to that is going to be near and dear to my heart as I get ready to wrap up this first lecture Eastern State Penitentiary. I had the privilege of going to Philly a few years ago and didn't even realize Eastern State Penitentiary was there, despite the fact that I've seen Ghost Adventures and some of these other paranormal shows. I had no idea. Destination Fear. I had no idea that that was there until we ended up looking it up. It was like, holy smokes, Eastern State Penitentiary is here. That's one of the most well-known and allegedly haunted penitentiaries in the entire country. And so we went. And little did I know, Al Capone did a stint at Eastern State Penitentiary. He was carrying a gun in a Philadelphia theater and ended up getting arrested and having to go to Eastern State Penitentiary for a little bit. They proudly displayed his jail cell and some pictures and imagery, about him. In fact, here is his actual cell, which you could see, like when you go on the tour, for anyone that may be in the Pennsylvania area, the Northeast area, in and around Philly. What you do is you get these headphones and you walk around and you go to different stations and you can hear key facts at different stations. I could spend 3-4 hours there because I'm just a nerd and I'm so fascinated by history and these old prisons and old insane asylums, old buildings. Like, there's a rich history there that I don't think most people appreciate, and I do. So this was actually Al Capone's official cell. And then as you see in this picture, this is how the cell likely would have been decorated back in the 1920s. He would have had 2 mattresses. He would have had a radio. He would have had a beautiful desk. You see the cigar on the plate. And what they told us in the audio recording is that Al Capone had a very powerful and lucrative relationship with many of the correctional officers, that they allowed him oftentimes to leave his cell, go take a smoke break, get better, get better food, or he had finer dining. All of this was a benefit to him being nothing more than the boss, and the boss of a place like Chicago, which is one of the key 4 pillars of gang activity. So we're going to stop there. I want to thank you for listening. Thank you for your attention. I hope that you looked at the subject matter and said, this is interesting. I'm really excited to be a part of this class and potentially get some valuable inside knowledge and information. And of course, there will be opportunities where I will expand upon this even greater, maybe even beyond what I lectured with my students. So I want to say take care. Thank you for tuning in, and I will see you next time.